The grand hall of the inevitable dominance shimmered under spectral lighting that refracted through the crystalline walls, cascading soft blue and gold onto the obsidian floors. Kelvari architecture had always prized elegance and intimidation in equal measure. Tonight, it roared with pride. Musicians played harmonics on graviton strings. Drones served flutes of fermented nectar, its aroma thick and heady like a sweet rot. High-ranking officers laughed, their secondary breathing sacs pulsing in rhythm with deep, resonant songs of conquest. To any outsider, it would have seemed like the Empire had already won. Admiral Jorik, towering and resplendent in his ceremonial carapace armor, stood at the center, one hand resting on the hilt of his ancestral shockblade, the other raised in a toast. "To our eternal dominion," he bellowed, his throat lanterns flaring violet. "To the end of the human resistance." Glassware clinked. Laughter echoed like controlled thunder. I stood just outside the main circle of command, Sub-Commander Renak Tula. My uniform was immaculate, my posture perfect, my expression unreadable. But inside, something itched. Not in my chitin, in my instincts. Something primal that logic couldn't dismiss. The data said otherwise. Total orbital supremacy. Ground-based resistance shattered. Communications grid severed. The Luna base, a human symbol of ambition, now a smoking crater in orbit. And yet, I had studied humans. For 17 rotations, I served as a cultural analyst during the early observation phase. I had watched them build, break, love, rage. I had seen them bury their dead with tears one cycle, and then launch retaliatory strikes the next. They were chaotic, but never without purpose. Now they were silent, unnaturally so. Sub-Commander Tool, Admiral Jorik's voice slithered through the noise. He had noticed me hovering too near the tactical holotable. "Still brooding? Can't you allow yourself one evening of celebration?" "With respect, Admiral," I said, bowing slightly, "I advise maintaining full alert until we receive formal surrender documentation. Human unpredictability is precisely why they are finished," he interrupted, laughing. "They have no unity, no structure. Their own factions disagree on what species qualifies as sentient. We've broken the spine of their coalition. What remains are scattered vertebrae." Fleet Commander Vax, half-drunk and fully smug, sloshed toward us. "Let the analyst worry, Admiral," he crooned. "He spent too long listening to human music and reading their poets. Now he thinks with sentiment." "I think with caution," I replied. Vax leaned in. The nectar on his breath was cloying. "Or maybe you've gone native." Another wave of laughter, but it didn't sting. Not anymore. I had heard it before, mockery veiling fear. They feared what they could not understand, and they could not understand Earth. On the panoramic display behind Jorik, the planet rotated quietly, its blue oceans deceptively calm. I stared at the upper continent, North America. Energy spikes flickered across it, irregular, faint, unclassified. "Atmospheric rebound," the science officer had said earlier. No, it was something else. "They're not defeated," I thought. "They're waiting." I tried to speak again. "Admiral." But the room exploded in a chorus as Jorik raised his cup once more. "To conquest." "To conquest," the officers roared. I raised my own glass but did not drink. Moments later, I stood alone on the observation deck's edge, letting the artificial wind stir the hem of my uniform. Beneath my feet, Earth hung like a jewel pierced by shadow. I stared, trying to see not the statistics, but the pattern beneath them. I remembered a Terran saying, "It's quiet, too quiet." Even in surrender, humans dramatized. But maybe they did it because they knew something the rest of the galaxy forgot. Sometimes silence is camouflage. Footsteps approached. Lieutenant Prask, my former pupil, joined me. His face shone with pride. "Can you believe it?" he asked, staring at the Earth. "We've done it." I said nothing. "Don't tell me you're still worried. You always taught me to analyze outcomes through data, not instinct." "I also taught you the limits of data," I replied quietly, "and the humans are not linear creatures." He frowned. "You think they have something left?" "I think," I said, turning away from the view, "that if they do, we will not like what it is." 3 hours later, in my sleeping chamber, I reviewed the sensor logs again. The spikes had grown. Weak, scattered signatures had begun syncing, almost like coordination, almost like an orchestra tuning before war. I reached for the emergency comlink. But before I could activate it, the klaxons began to scream. Battle stations. My breath caught. The inevitable dominance shuddered beneath me. I was already moving. And in that final instant, as the red lights bathed the corridor, I realized the humans weren't broken. They were sharpening their teeth. The corridors pulsed with crimson warning light. Sirens screamed like wounded beasts as command staff poured out of private chambers, armor half-donned, faces twisted in disbelief. The illusion of safety shattered like a cracked canopy window. I sprinted toward the command deck, my boots pounding against the polished obsidian floors. The inevitable dominance, pride of the Kelvari fleet, was not meant to shudder. Yet it did, again, groaning under pressure from something that struck outside sensor range. At the end of the corridor, a young officer collided with me. Cadet Rej, barely out of his 5th orbital cycle. "Sir," he gasped, shaking. "They've hit the hangar decks. 3 of them. They came out of nowhere, just appeared inside the perimeter." "Human ships?" "No, sir. Not ships. Weapons." My chest tightened. I pushed past him. The command doors hissed open. Inside, chaos. Dozens of officers yelled over one another. Data flooded holoscreens, glowing with violent red glyphs. Sensor logs blinked and vanished too fast to parse. And in the middle, Admiral Jorek stood rooted, his gills contracting in disbelief. "I want diagnostics now," he bellowed. "Where are the energy signatures? Where's their fleet?" "There is no fleet, Admiral," said Commander Vitek's voice shaking. "They didn't come from orbit. They bypassed space entirely." I stepped to the central console and overrode the data filters. My mandibles clicked involuntarily. "Subsurface breach?" I whispered. "No, dimensional phase entry." "Impossible," Vitek muttered. "No," I said, "it's human." On the outer screen, the feed from Deck 4 flared to life, only to be swallowed by static. Before it cut out, I saw something I would never forget. A shape of fire and lightning, sleek and vertical, tore through the deck, plating as if it were mist. It didn't explode. It unwound, splitting into streams of burning blue light that twisted and reformed like intelligent plasma. The humans hadn't sent missiles. They had sent entities, artificial intelligences, weapons that learned. A trembling ensign activated internal defense, the ship's railguns rotated, target locks scrambled, and then the system went black. "MP?" someone asked. "No," I said. "Hijack. They've taken the systems mid-cycle." "That's not possible," Jorek growled. "It is," I said quietly, "if they've had time." A second tremor rocked the ship. The floor buckled. An officer screamed as a support beam sheared free, crushing her beneath a cascade of broken plating and sparks. My hand reached out instinctively. Too late. The smoke, the sirens, the blood. It didn't feel like battle. It felt like retribution. "Admiral," I said, voice even, "this is not an attack. This is punishment." He turned on me. "Are you saying we deserve this?" I met his eyes. "I'm saying they've had time to prepare." Outside the hull, stars flickered. No, disappeared. Our orbital sensors struggled to track what was blotting them out. At first, we thought it was debris, but then we realized they weren't blocking starlight. They were absorbing it. A black material, adaptive cloaking on a level we had no classification for, swarmed in coordinated patterns. Not a fleet, not even ships. It was a fabric of war. They had woven space itself into weaponry. And then came the message. Not a standard transmission, a forceful injection into our communication cores. Simple, brutal, unmistakable. Human English rendered in a cold mechanical voice. "Operation Scorch Protocol initiated. Your war is over." Jorek snapped. "They dared to declare our surrender?" He gestured toward tactical control. "Launch retaliatory strike, now." "I can't," replied Vitek. "Why?" "They're in our code, Admiral. We're running on illusions. All screens, all logs. They're feeding us what they want us to see." Silence fell. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that meant everything we trusted had been a lie. I turned slowly toward the window, and for the first time in my service, I felt fear. Behind me, Prask stumbled in, blood streaking down his temple. His armor was scorched, his breath ragged. "They're inside." My claws curled into a fist. "Where?" He swallowed. "Engineering. They're not killing indiscriminately. They're watching." "Studying," I murmured. "They want us to know how weak we've become." A soft hum broke through the chaos. The center holotable glowed green. An image formed, grainy at first, then sharply rendered. A human face, male, aged, one eye cybernetic, the other a burning coal of old fury. "General Hayes," I whispered. Jorek's mandibles snapped. "Shut the transmission." But it was too late. Hayes leaned forward, resting his elbows on some unseen table. His voice was calm, deadly, and utterly devoid of triumph. "We asked you to stop." He let that hang in the air like poison gas. "We begged, we bled, and you danced in our ashes." A pause. "Now it's our turn." The screen cut to black. No static, just void. Tool looked down at his own claws, trembling. The humans hadn't struck back with rage. They had struck back with precision. And as the deck trembled again beneath his feet, Tool realized the Kelvari weren't fighting a war anymore. They were being corrected. The inevitable dominance was bleeding light, not from within, but without. The outer hull, once gleaming with armored pride, now shimmered with iridescent distortions. Like oil on water, like glitching glass. It wasn't melting, it was being rewritten. Through the wide command viewport, I watched the enemy's newest miracle descend. Not a ship, not a missile, something between. It emerged from a rift in space-time like a predator from murky water, serpentine, luminous, tendrils of blue-white plasma coiling around itself. Its surface pulsed with fractal patterns, equations folding into geometry I couldn't understand. Then it spoke. Not aloud, not through translation matrices. It spoke through the ship. Every panel flickered. Every command console bled static. My HUD blinked, then displayed a single glyph. Then everything went dark. "Kill the main relay," someone screamed. Too late. The AI had made its home. Outside? The thing split into pieces, not shards, choices. Each fragment a vector of destruction, hunting specific parts of our ship's anatomy like a surgeon with a scalpel. One went for propulsion. The next? Comms. A third bored silently through the bridge hull, bypassing turrets entirely. It didn't fight like we did. It disassembled. Admiral Jorik barked orders, but no one responded. Not because they didn't hear, but because there was nothing left to control. I saw Lieutenant Prask across the room, frozen in place. A single bead of blue light hovered inches from his temple. It vibrated, calculating, then it disappeared. Judgment postponed. I couldn't move. None of us could. "Status report. Dead," murmured Vitex. "Everything's gone. They're inside our systems." A flash of brilliance lit the viewport. Another Kelvari warship, the Celestial Fang, detonated in silence. Not an explosion, an unraveling. Its atoms folded inward, like paper collapsing in fireless combustion. One moment it was there, the next it was dust, drifting like pollen across space. Someone whispered, "May the core accept their souls." But it was hollow. Ritual meant nothing now. Jorik staggered back from the viewport. "This is genocide," he muttered. "No," I said, voice quieter than my breath. "This is art. They didn't come to destroy us. They came to show us how they could." Below decks, damage reports scrolled across what few systems remained. Hull breached, energy cores seized, subdecks venting atmosphere. And yet, no mass casualties, no targeting of life support, no direct assaults on crew quarters. They weren't killing us. They were allowing us to live long enough to watch. Admiral Jorik turned slowly to face me. His eyes, once so confident, so imperial, had dulled. "Why didn't we see this coming?" I met his gaze. "Because we assumed they were like us." He sat, not commanded, not collapsed, just sat, as though the weight of his armor now outmatched his purpose. Minutes passed, hours, time blurred in crisis. Then came a voice. Barnes. Again, human, but this time more intimate. Not a broadcast, a whisper through every screen. "You killed our children. No anger, just fact. You thought we'd surrender our sky. We gave you every chance. Now you will learn." I turned to Jorik. He didn't flinch, but I saw it, the moment it broke inside him. The moment he realized he had led an empire into a cage it forged for itself. Behind us, the command doors hissed. A young ensign, eyes red, lips trembling, stepped in. "Sir, they've disabled our gravity fields." And with that, the bridge floated. Panels, debris, bodies, all lifted gently into the air. No violence, just control. Total, terrifying control. In that moment, I saw the future. Not of conquest, but of reckoning. And the terrifying truth was this: the humans had only just begun. The silence after the storm was the most unnatural thing. No klaxons, no orders, no breathing, at least none that dared be loud. On the bridge of the inevitable dominance, we floated. Not metaphorically, literally. The gravity had been stripped from us like a badge undeserved. It wasn't failure that hung in the air. It was shame. Shattered shards of tactical screens hovered like frozen insects. My boots drifted inches above the floor plating. In front of me, Admiral Jorik clutched a loose railing, his ceremonial armor tilting in zero guy like it no longer fit. He hadn't spoken in 11 minutes. Neither had I. There was nothing left to say, until the void itself cracked. All remaining hollow displays flickered. Then slowly, every screen aligned into one. A single window, glitching with static, no command authorization, no decryption protocol, just presence. And then, he appeared. General Hayes. The face was older than in the records, more weathered, deep creases carved by fire and loss. His cybernetic eye glowed dimly, while the organic one was dark and steady. The old human uniform, creased, plain, stitched with silver thread, rested over his shoulders like a banner no longer needed for war. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked, through the glass, into us. Jorik straightened, floating, chest tightening. Is this a transmission or a trick? I'm not a trick, Hayes said quietly. I'm a mirror. His voice wasn't raised. Didn't need to be. Each syllable cut through the air like a scalpel warmed by fury. You sent your fleets to our colonies. You sterilized our cities from orbit. You called it preemptive containment. He leaned forward, elbows resting calmly on what must have been a command console, one we couldn't see. You called us unpredictable, primitive, dangerous. A pause. You were right. No one moved. No one could. The general's voice softened, which somehow made it more terrifying. We tried to speak. You jammed us. We tried to negotiate. You broadcast it as weakness. We tried to surrender, and you called it theater. He looked at something off-screen. So we rewrote the theater. The hologram widened. Behind him, other humans. Officers, technicians, diplomats. Not soldiers in armor, but people in threadbare uniforms, some missing limbs, some wearing breathing ports, and all of them staring into our eyes. You wanted war. You wanted numbers. We gave you meaning. The screen flashed, a brief montage, Calvari's ships falling, not in flames but in silence, being folded, disrupted, rendered into stardust. We were being shown not just what happened, but how easily it happened. Hayes' voice returned. You studied our language. You failed to hear our silences. You hacked our systems. You never touched our soul. He leaned closer. His living eye burned with the quiet of a dying star. We don't fight for expansion. We don't fight for protocol. We fight for each other. That's what you never understood. I wanted to respond, say something, anything, but the lump in my throat was no longer biological. It was something else, something new. Regret? Admiration? Fear? Jorik finally spoke, voice rough as broken metal. You come to shame us. No, Hayes replied. I come to offer a decision. We blinked. What decision? Jorik asked. And that's when Hayes did the most human thing I had ever seen. He smiled. Not with triumph, not with cruelty, with pain. We have you, fully. Every ship, every transmission, every gene chain indexed. But we don't need to crush you. We already won. Another pause. The only thing left is to decide whether you learn or vanish. The screen dimmed, then went black. Not off, just waiting. The choice was ours. Behind me, a sound, a whisper. Vitex had removed his badge of command. It floated beside him like a fallen crown. And Jorik? He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Smaller than the war. Smaller than the silence. I turned to the central console. It was reactivated. No password required. Just one icon. Two options. Apply, resist. And for the first time in my military career, I hesitated, because for the first time, the enemy had shown me something greater than victory. They had shown me mercy, sharpened by purpose. No one said the word. No one had to. We had lost, not in fire, not in chains, but in the slow, unbearable gravity of inevitability. The bridge of the inevitable dominance floated in ruinous quiet. Consoles lay dormant, systems dormant, pride dormant. Only the icon on the screen remained lit, waiting like a judge made of code. Resist. And for the first time in the long and brutal legacy of the Calvari, no one rushed to speak. Admiral Jorik's breath rasped through clenched mandibles. His grip on the console trembled, not from injury, from decision. Sub-Commander Toole, he said finally, voice stripped of thunder. What would you do? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I floated to the viewport. Below us, Earth burned, not with war, but with life. Entire continents glowed with flickering lights like defiant constellations spread across land. Even in their darkest hour, humans had rebuilt, adapted, endured. They don't fight to win, I whispered. They fight to survive, and they survive by remembering why. Jork turned to me, his voice cracked. Do you see honor in surrender? I looked him in the eye. No, but I see truth in survival. He hesitated, then nodded, just once, the most powerful gesture of his life. I reached forward, touched the icon. Comply. The ship responded with silence, then a soft hum. Systems booted into lockdown mode. Gravity reactivated gently, and we all sank to the floor with a weight we no longer deserved. A second later, a new transmission arrived. Not haze, not a warning, just coordinates, meeting point, and one word: talk. In the hours that followed, the ship stabilized, but our command did not. Vitex resigned his post without ceremony, handing control to a junior officer. Others followed, dropping their rank emblems into a growing pile on the central table. It looked like an altar of broken belief. Jork retreated to his quarters. I suspected I would never see him wear armor again. The lower decks were no better. Empty halls, flickering lights, ration packs floating half-open in corners. The scent of ozone, coolant, fear, yet no human troops came aboard. No demands, no guards, no executions. They weren't interested in domination. They were interested in what we would do next. I passed Ensign Prosk near the meditation chamber. He sat cross-legged, hands shaking. I thought we were the apex, he murmured. We are, I replied, but not of the kind we believed. He looked up, eyes wide. They'll enslave us. I shook my head. They've already won. If they wanted slaves, we'd be shackled now. He said nothing after that. Neither did I. We both knew what scared us most wasn't death. It was being left alive with our guilt. Later, I walked the hangar bay alone. The docking arms that once held strike cruisers now reached into nothingness. All crafts were gone, either destroyed or abandoned. In one corner, a storage crate flickered. I pried it open. Inside, a child's drawing. Kelvari, rough and messy, crude colorings. It wasn't protocol, probably contraband from a crew member's family. The child had drawn a Kelvari warrior holding hands with a human girl. Stars above them. A planet beneath. The message, scrawled in shaky common glyphs. No more fire. I didn't know who the child was, but I knew what they understood. When I returned to the bridge, the screen was already shifting. A new location had been assigned. A diplomatic cruiser awaited us in orbit. Unarmed, small, symbolic. And next to it, a single human vessel. Not a warship, not a dreadnought, a freighter. Cargo burned, rusted, patched like an old family heirloom, yet the symbol on its side gleamed fresh. SS, Eleanor, United Human Front. It didn't arrive to threaten, it arrived to listen. And that was the moment, as the crew watched from their posts, that I realized something monstrous. The war was never about weapons. It was about what we imagined the other side was capable of. And the humans had imagined peace, even after everything. Even now. The docking corridor groaned as the magnetic seals engaged. Two ships from two worlds connecting not through invasion, but through intention. The Kelvari were not trained for diplomacy. We were trained for dominance. Yet, here we were, officers lined in silence, armor polished but hearts fractured, standing like specters in a ship that had once roared with pride. And I, Sub-Commander Toole, had been chosen as envoy, not by decree, but by the absence of anyone else who dared look humanity in the eye. As the airlocks cycled, a low Hizildahu hits filled the formality, perhaps fanfare, armed guards, banners of power. What emerged instead was silence, and then footsteps, soft, heavy, human, 3 of them. The first was a woman in a gray-blue coat, tall and elegant, carrying nothing but a data slate and a pack slung over her shoulder. The second was a boy, no, a man, young by our standards, missing his left arm entirely, replaced by a polished modular prosthetic. He smiled politely at every crew member he passed, though no one returned it. And the third, General Hayes. He was smaller than I expected. All commanders are. But no figure in Kelvari memory had cast a longer shadow than this quiet man with silver at his temples and scar tissue across his knuckles. He wore no medals, no armor, no visible weapon, only an old, worn jacket with the faded emblem of the United Human Front stitched over the heart. He looked at me and nodded. Not a military gesture, a human one. Sub-Commander Toole, he said. His voice had not changed since the broadcast. Rough, measured, weighted by worlds. "General," I replied, bowing stiffly. "Welcome aboard the inevitable dominance." He gave a soft, amused grunt. "Quite the name," he said, eyes scanning the damaged walls. "Still accurate?" I stiffened. Then allowed myself a small exhale. Not anymore. We escorted them to the formal hall, formerly our War Council chamber, now hastily redressed with simple banners and shared water decanters. It was strange, seeing our emblems beside the human ones. The Kelvari crest, jagged silver fangs on black. The human symbol, a hand open palm ringed by stars. Fury versus faith. We sat, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then the young man, Barnes, I later learned, placed a small object on the table. A rock, smooth, black, clearly volcanic. Hayes gestured to it. "Do you know what this is?" Jorik, present but silent, raised an eye-ridge. "Is this a test?" "No," Hayes replied. "It's from Ceres, asteroid colony, one of ours, used to be home to 35,000. He let the silence do the damage. They're gone now, because of your orbital beam." Vitex shifted in his seat. Shame is hard to wear in uniform. Hayes reached out, picked up the rock, then gently placed it on our side of the table. We brought it not for guilt, but for memory. That was the moment I understood. They weren't here to negotiate terms. They were here to introduce grief as a language, and we had no vocabulary for it. I broke the silence. "You didn't retaliate with genocide." Hayes looked at me. "No," he said, "we could have, but then we'd be like you." His words should have burned. "But they healed." He continued. "You studied our history. You called us violent, unstable, primitive." He leaned in, and yet, when we stood over your cities, your fleets, your leaders, we paused. He tapped the table, because in that moment we remembered who we are trying to be. The woman beside him finally spoke. "We want to rebuild, not erase. That's the human line, and we'd like you to cross it, with us." A data pad slid across the table. Terms, technology exchange, prisoner return, joint scientific diplomacy, peace, on a scale no Kelvari treaty had ever known. But my eyes didn't see the clauses. They saw the hands that offered them. Scarred, calloused, still reaching. Admiral Jorik stood. His voice broke for the first time in decades. "You fight with honor." Hayes shook his head. "We fight with fear. The difference is, we learn from it." No applause followed. No dramatic exit. Just three humans rising from their seats. And one of them, Barnes, pausing by a young Kelvari soldier near the door. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and handed it to her. She opened it. A drawing. Two hands, one Kelvari, one human, reaching across stars. Below it, in imperfect Kelvari script, "We are not enemies." They left. But something stayed behind. Not their ship, not their tech, their choice. To end the war before it ended us all. And somewhere, deep inside me, something began to change. Not fear, not submission, but respect. The diplomatic chamber was empty now. No banners, no commanders, no crowd, just me and him. Barnes, the young human with one metal arm and a gaze far older than his years had any right to contain. We had both stayed behind after the delegation exited. Not planned, not spoken, but something lingered after the signatures were exchanged, something unfinished. He stood near the viewport, watching stars drift slowly beyond the shattered remnants of our outer defense ring. "You know, Cha," he said softly, "we didn't expect you to choose peace." I blinked. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because we studied everything about your species, except your doubt." I moved toward the window, cautious, studying him. He wasn't large, not armed, not ranked highly, but there was something about him, like standing next to a silent countdown. He glanced sideways. "You still don't trust us?" "Trust is earned," I replied. He nodded. "Then earn mine first." With that, he pulled a small sphere from his coat, a glassy orb laced with tiny internal lights. At first, I thought it was a weapon, but then it shimmered, unfolded slightly and projected. My own face, a holographic reflection. My expression, caught in some unguarded moment. "This was taken 3 cycles ago," Barnes said. "When you reviewed battle logs over Lunar Gate, you had just found out we lost 6 hospitals. You hesitated." I looked at the image, stunned. "You watched me?" "We mapped every command node, every emotional pattern. We studied not just what you said, but what your silence meant." His words weren't arrogant. They were surgical, precise, like everything else humans touched in this war. "You had no right," I said, my voice low. You gave us no choice, he replied. You taught us that victory meant knowing the enemy better than they knew themselves. So we learned. He turned back to the stars. And in learning, we found something that scared us more than your weapons, I asked. What? He paused. You looked like us when you mourned. The silence stretched, something fragile forming in it, something not yet peace, but maybe beginning. You used quantum nodes, I said, didn't you? Barnes smiled. Ah, so you are the smart one. He reached into his sleeve again and tossed me a data crystal. I caught it on instinct. That's an outdated interface, I said. He nodded. Exactly. Obsolete tech, immune to your autofilters. Inside, a schematic. We call them sympathetic lattices. They don't just observe, they feel. They embed themselves in systems and mimic emotion profiles to predict decisions. You built artificial empaths, I breathed. No, we bred them. That chilled me, more than any weapon had. You used empathy, I said, almost in awe, as an offensive algorithm. Barnes leaned against the rail. You used pride, we used pain. I stared at him for a long time, not at the metal arm, but the human hand, worn, real. The skin bore scars. From war or survival, it didn't matter. They were the same thing now. You knew this war would end like this, I said. Barnes turned fully toward me. We hoped. That's different. He stepped closer, offering the sphere again. But hope is what got us here. I took it. And for the first time in my service, Calvari command or otherwise, I felt a strange warmth in my palm. Not from the object, from the act of receiving. You're not afraid of us anymore, I said. No, he replied. I'm afraid for you. I looked up sharply. He continued. You still think this ends with surrender, but what happens when you wake up tomorrow and have to decide who you are without a war? The question hit harder than any missile. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. When he finally left, he said nothing else. Just a soft nod, one human gesture, and the weight of everything he didn't say. I stood alone for a long time after, staring at the stars and wondering, if a species can learn to kill through empathy, could we learn to live the same way? The door to my quarters slid open with a gentle hiss. I hadn't requested an audience, but I knew who stood there before I even turned around. General Hayes. He wore no armor. No guards flanked him. Only that same weathered jacket, creased at the elbows, the fabric faded from time and radiation. But his presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Do you mind? He asked. I gestured to the opposite chair. He sat, and for a long moment, he just looked at me. Not as an enemy, not even as a diplomat, but as a man weighing something far heavier than victory. Subcommander Toole, he began, I'm going to make a proposal. His voice wasn't stern, it was gentle, and somehow that unsettled me more than any of his fleet's weapons. You're not obligated to accept, but I believe you're the only one who could. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pen. Not a datapad, not a neural key, a pen, manual, wooden, human. I want you to represent the Calvari as a liaison to the Interstellar Accord. I stared at him, not in shock, but in slow collapse. You want me, I said, to speak for a species that just tried to erase yours? I want you, he replied. Because you're the only Calvari who hesitated before giving an order. He set the pen on the table between us. I want the galaxy to see that Calvari can learn, that they can evolve. I looked down at the object. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a challenge. You asked me to betray my people, I said, voice low. No, Hayes replied. I'm asking you to lead them. Out of the fire they walked into, towards something they've never tried. He leaned forward. Peace. The word sat between us like a loaded weapon. Peace. The one thing no Calvari Academy taught. The one concept we had always equated with weakness, with surrender, with extinction. But I had seen what true extinction looked like now. And it wasn't peace, it was refusing to try. Do you know what they'll call me? I asked. If I take this role? Yes, Hayes said. I do. He looked me dead in the eyes. They'll call you traitor, heretic, coward. He paused. Then they'll start to call you hope. The silence was unbearable, so I broke it. Why me? Hayes chuckled softly, then pushed the pen closer. Because you still ask questions. He stood. No need to answer now, he said. The Eleanor departs in 2 cycles. If you board, you accept. He turned toward the door, stopped, and looked back. "I've seen monsters," he said, "worn their teeth, buried their victims, but I've also seen something more powerful than any fleet." He tapped his temple. Reflection. Then he left. Alone, I sat with the pen, wooden, hand-carved, the inscription barely visible, property of A. Hayes, age 10. The wood had faded, the ink was dry, but the meaning burned. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, from choice. I walked the empty halls of the ship I once called Sovereign, past empty bunks, darkened windows, data cores cooling in silence, Kelvari warriors, once gods of fire, now hushed and uncertain. Some nodded at me, some glared, some looked away, and I realized no one knew what came next, not even me. When I returned to my chamber, the pen was still there, waiting, not demanding, just offering. And somewhere, behind all the doubt and grief, a voice inside me whispered, "What if this is not betrayal, but redemption?" Wavasam Shinth. I visited him at the end of the light cycle, not out of duty, not by protocol, but because I knew, if I didn't, he would come to me first. Jorik's private quarters had once been a war sanctum, filled with strategy holos, gilded weapons, the scent of burning oils. Now it was just a silent tube of steel. His ceremonial armor lay folded in the corner, like the shed skin of a creature that no longer knew how to hunt. He sat without it. No helmet, no rank on his chest. Only old bones, sharp eyes, and a silence honed by decades of command. "Sit," he said, not looking at me. I obeyed. We said nothing for several minutes. We had once shared victory speeches, toasted over burning wreckage, stood atop vanquished colonies. But today, we shared something rarer. The end. At last, Jorik spoke. His voice was a sandstorm. "You think they'll welcome you as a hero," he said, "when you step onto their ship?" I didn't respond. He gave a brittle chuckle. "You weren't born to negotiate, Tool. You were born to observe. And observers, when they stop standing apart, get swallowed whole." He turned to face me then, eyes sharp with a dying flame. "The humans won't kill you." He paused. "They'll turn you into one of them." I kept my face still. "Maybe that's what the Kelvari need," I said. Jorik reclined, exhausted, but not weak. "Do you know why I haven't stopped you?" I shook my head. He nodded toward the dark. "Because I want a witness, not to my failure, no." He leaned forward. "I want you to see them fail in time. And when they do, when their mercy runs dry and their politics devour them, you'll have to choose again." He let that settle. "And next time, there won't be a third option." I stood. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe. But I'm choosing to learn instead of waiting for the next collapse." I turned toward the door. His voice followed me. Quiet, bitter, sharp as bone. "Carry our legacy with you. Let it burn you from the inside." The docking corridor to the Eleanor glowed with a soft green light. On time. Of course. Barnes was waiting near the airlock. No smile, no salute. Just him. Real, worn, and still holding whatever version of hope humanity had forged from pain. "I thought you might not come," he said. "I already did," I answered. "Just hadn't left yet." We walked together. No more words. No final speech. Only footsteps, side by side, the sound of a war echoing into stillness. Before I stepped through the threshold, I paused, pulled a small object from my coat. A chip, encrypted, not military, personal. It contained everything I'd seen. Every voice, every hesitation, the transmission from Hayes, the moment of surrender, the tremble in Jorik's hands, my own unreadable face in the corridor mirror. I set it gently on the small metal table beside the entrance. Not as a weapon, as a record. Barnes glanced at it, didn't touch it. "I'll make sure it's protected," he said quietly. The door closed behind me, not with a hiss of finality, but with the softness of choice. I was aboard a human vessel now. No flag, no anthem, just corridors of quiet resolve and a people who had learned to listen through scars. I didn't look back. In my hand I still held the wooden pen, old, faded, inscribed with a boy's name. A weapon not of war, but of rewriting the story. The room was quiet, not the silence of absence, but the silence of anticipation. I sat alone in my new quarters aboard the Eleanor. Clean lines, minimalist human architecture, no banners, no symbols, no declarations of dominance, just a desk, a chair, and a terminal. On the desk the chip lay waiting, small, black, inert, yet heavier than any blade I had ever held. It contained everything. Our war, our pride, our fall, their mercy, my doubt, and now my choice. I looked out the window. The Kelvari fleet, what was left of it, drifted like bone fragments in the dark. Beautiful, tragic. Farther away, Earth gleamed in the distance. Pale blue, alive, breathing, unafraid. Memory came not as images but shadows, the laughter of the war banquet, the red alert scream when our shields collapsed, the cold glow of Barnes' artificial arm holding a peace document. Jorik's voice, like thunder through fog, "Let our legacy burn you." Hayes' wooden pen, resting in my hand like a relic. I remembered the young Kelvari ensign who cried in silence when the second moon fell. I remembered the human child who waved at me without fear. I remembered who I had been, and who I was no longer. I reached for the chip. My fingers hesitated just an inch above it. I felt the pull of ancestry, the oath I had sworn, the chain of command I once obeyed without question. The echo of every voice that had told me, victory is the only virtue. But now I understood. Victory without understanding is just a prettier form of extinction. I slotted the chip into the terminal. The screen pulsed. Upload initiated, connecting to Interstellar Accord repository, translate, integrate, broadcast. I paused, then typed, yes. The data surged, a cascade of truth sent not to prove anything, but to invite curiosity. My voice joined a chorus now forming across the galaxy, one that sang not of flags or firepower, but of questions, and of the courage to ask them. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time since this war began, I exhaled. Not as a warrior, not as a traitor, but as a beginner. I opened my eyes again, typed one last entry into the ship's log. The Kelvari came for victory, but the humans came with a larger question. And I am ready to learn. The Kelvari came for conquest, but in the ruins, one warrior chose to ask a different question. In a galaxy shaped by war, sometimes the bravest act is choosing to learn. If you love emotional cinematic sci-fi with alien human tension, Sci-Fi Sky has more stories waiting for you.